So we are continuing our study in the book of Hosea, and I want to kind of frame this. I want to try to bring you into this story, into this lesson a little more objectively, and have some ownership in this. A lot of times we know novels, some of the greatest novels that ever been written are from the point of the main character. And as you read along, whether it's Moby Dick or whatever the story may be, as you read the story, the main character, you're like viewing it through them. And as you do that, you start to feel what that main character is doing and experiencing, and you live your life through that character of a novel. In a lot of things, we can then relate to the character, even though we know it's fiction, it's imaginary. You know what it's like to feel water. You know what it's like to feel hunger or to be punished or things like this. And that adds such a great dimension of experience. That's why these, VR goggles and games and stuff, you play it in first character player, because what happens is the person experiencing it is able to almost become a part with that character in the game or whatever they're playing. And it just enthralls them. It becomes so relatable. Well, we're not playing a game. We're dealing with God's word. But when we look at the prophet Hosea and the message, I want us to look at this as a novel, as a story between a man and a wife and his children. And that's the focus. It's a family. That's something we all can relate to. I mean, even if you're not married, you're single, you had mother and father. Maybe unfortunately you didn't, but we can relate to the concept of having relationships that are very meaningful to us, and especially when it comes to a husband and a wife and what it means. And when we're younger and we grow up, we're before we get married and we hit our teenage years, all of a sudden we look around and we're looking for somebody that we can join with and become one with for the rest of our lives. And that's usually a wife or a husband. And we have this dream of what that relationship will be like. And we have this vision of how we're going to have such beautiful days together. Now, I know, if you've been married a little while, that's not so real. But we have that, don't we? But I'll tell you what, this book of Hosea and this concept of his wife being a prostitute is very disturbing. It really is. It's one of my biggest fears when I got married and as I grew older, was this idea that my wife would leave me and go with another man. And you see the devastating effect that it has had on people, whether it's the husband or the wife. And this is what God wants to bring you into this story. He wants you to be able to come and to join in and see this type of emotion and get a little bit of a feel for what it's like to be him. There's not very many times that you get to go and end up being at God level and get to see it from his perspective. It's just too grand. So how does he do it? He brings it out in stories like this. This is like a living parable. I mean, literally, it's live. It's not a story. He literally is making and having a righteous man go and marry somebody that is, okay, I know what's going on. Oh, I'm sorry, not seeing the slides on just happened. We're not seeing the slides on the YouTube because I didn't do something right. Go figure. Sorry, Becky. There we go. Okay, you should begin it. So the idea of coming into this story and being able to understand it from his level is very important, because that's the best way we learn. Being able to, as I say, walk in somebody else's shoes, to be able to experience it. And so God wants us to understand what it's like to be committed and to be there all the time, to be faithful, and yet to have the one which you have joined into this precious relationship to be completely unfaithful constantly, and understand some of the concepts of God's character through seeing the way God deals with it. So now we're going to read a story, and I want to read it. I'm going to read the whole chapter 2, but I want to shape it a little, like I said, a little differently. I want us to look, and now we have three basic characters in this story. Let's just imagine, okay, Hosea chapter 2, it's a book and it's about a loving couple, a couple that has come together, a marriage. The main character is the husband, and that is God. But I want you to think of it as you. This is you, the faithful spouse in this relationship. The wife is Israel. It's the very precious one that God had made a covenant with Abraham. It's the one that God has been dedicated to, that has been faithful to all along. But this is your wife. The children are the ones that are the individuals of that, the family, the children as well. She has already been unfaithful. You have had 3 children with her. The names alone with the children reflect the attitude that the father has towards her wife indirectly. And one, that Jezreel means I will scatter. I will remove. The other one is no mercy. I will have no mercy. That's the way we act. If you think about this, when we first would find out about a spouse that is not faithful to us, the first thing we want to do is scatter, remove them. The next emotion we have is what? No mercy. You don't deserve mercy. And then the next one is, you're not my spouse. The third one was basically, you're not my people. So God is saying, through the 3 names of the children, I'll scatter you. I'm not being merciful, what you've done to me. You are not my wife. Now, I showed last week how God is showing through the judgment, the usage of these names, but through this, you will find that he reapplies these words and brings them back into a restored, beautiful meaning. That is his grace. That is where you and I and most of us would fail to do and be able to do this. And that's what you see. He's even going to bring up a very significant historical location. And he uses Egypt. You'll hear Egypt. You're going to hear about Achan, Achor. And he's always kind of tried to remind his wife, of this wilderness, that wilderness period that they were out there, that they had nothing. What was Canaan? Milk and honey. 40 years, you had nothing. They were stripped naked. How did they come out of Egypt? Naked, like a baby. I gave you everything. I guided you. I fed you. I brought you over into the land where I gave you all of this. And what did you do? You turned around and believed that it was Baal. So this is kind of the thought as you look at this. Think like a Hebrew. Think about the historical. These are metaphorical. So it means it has some meaning in their historical context of a Jew through Exodus and Deuteronomy and Moses and things like this. So keep your mind a little open with it. So we're going to read the whole thing, but we're not going to discuss the first half of this. So this is him talking to his children of his unfaithful wife. He starts out. Say to your brothers, you are my people. To your sisters, you have received mercy. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband, that she put away from her whoring from her face, and her adultery between her breasts, lest I strip her naked, and make her as the day that she was born, and like her in a wilderness, and make her like a parched land, and kill her with thirst. Upon her children also I will have no mercy, because they are children of whoredom. For their mother has played the whore. She has conceived them as has acted shamefully. For she has said, I will go after my lovers, who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil, my drink. Therefore I will hedge her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her, so that she cannot find her path. And she shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them. And she will seek them, but she will not find them. Then she'll say, I will go and return to my first husband, for it is better for me than now. And she did not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil, and I lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Therefore, I will take back my grain in its time, and I will take away my wool and my flax, which were to cover her nakedness. Now, I will uncover her lewdness in sight of her lovers, and no one shall rescue her out of my hand. And I will put an end to all her mirth, her feast, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her appointed feasts. And I will lay waste to the vines and her fig trees, of which she said, these are my wages, which my lovers have given me. I will make them a forest, and the beasts of the field shall devour them. And I will punish her for the feast days of Baals, when she has burned offers to them and adorned herself with ring and jewelry and went after her lovers and forgot me, declares the Lord. Therefore, behold, I will allure her. I will bring her back into the wilderness, and I will speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her her vineyards and make her valley of Achor a door of hope. And there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me Baal. For I will remove the names of Baals from her mouth, and they shall be remembered by name no more. And I will make for them a covenant on the day with the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, and the creepy things of the ground. I will abolish the bow, the sword, the war from the land, and I will make you lie down in safety. And I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me right in righteousness and in justice, in steadfastness, in love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. And in that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth, and the earth shall answer the grain, the wine, and the oil, and they shall answer Jezreel. And I will show her for myself in the land. And I will have mercy on no mercy. And I will say to not my people, you are my people. And he shall say, you are my God. It's poetry. You know, when you look at this, and that's why you have to have a little bit of a context historically, because some of these references are very Hebrewic, so we don't get them. And unless you're a great scholar of Old Testament history and Deuteronomy and you understand these things, they can be a little bit lost. But you get the idea here of this turmoil, this difficult and turmoil in the relationship, and yet the husband is trying everything he can to be able to bring him back. But he can't just bring her back because she's not getting it, not understanding what she has done. And so through the way that he has, one, named the children to help remind her. I mean, if every day you saw the children that you had with this man, scatter, no mercy, not my people. And knowing that you're the one that's unfaithful. But every morning you get up and say, hey, good morning, scatter. Good morning. No, my people, not my child, not my, it's just it would be a constant reminder to you as a wife that there's something broke. And then nothing would work. It was just not working. And so when she would depart and go, and she was still with this delusion of believing that somehow she was able to gain these things, all those, the wax, the wool, the food, was coming from Baal. And he blasts back and says, and I was the one that gave them to her. And she turned around and looked at me and said, look at my lovers. Look what they did for me. And he's like, that's mine. And that's the way it is, isn't it? When you worship a false god and you get anything positive out of it, it's not from them. It's a lie. And that's what happens to people who are unfaithful to God and go off into something else, is that they latch on to something and they start to see these supposed benefits, and maybe they are there. But you know what? All good comes from God. Nothing good comes from evil and dead idols. So if you are getting blessed from this supposed atheistic, agnostic, or false religion, it's not from them. It's from God. And the abomination to me is you don't even recognize it. She didn't even see the fact that it was from your first husband, your first love. And it wasn't until he forced your hand that you find, well, okay, I guess I'll go back to my first husband. It was better then than it was now. And that is what is so troublesome. And so that's the first part that we see with this, is the idea of this unfaithfulness and how God's going to have to deal with it. But you notice it changed, isn't it? And this is the way it happens in a real relationship. In a real relationship, when there's infidelity and betrayal, the first thing happens is we want to leave, scatter. The next thing is, I'm not giving them mercy. They don't deserve mercy. And they are not my spouse. And that's the first response. And we strike out, and we're going to punish them, and we withdraw from them. We don't talk to them because of the unfaithfulness. That we can relate to. That's a natural type of response. That's what God says I'm doing. You notice that he drawed, like I said earlier, with this condition of Egypt coming out. That's the birth. They were birthed out of Egypt. And when they landed out and they were born, they were basically naked and had nothing in the wilderness. And it was God who brought them up and nurtured them and built them into the nation that they were and started building them up. And the ultimate was when he brought them into the land of Canaan and gave them such a blessedness of food. Remember, he said, you're going to inherit homes that you didn't build. You're going to have vineyards that you did not plant. The infrastructure of all the economic stuff is going to be in place. All you're going to have to do is walk in and go get it. You're not going to do anything. And so for them to have that and turn around, God said, you know what I'm going to do? Pop you back out, take you back out to that wilderness, and let's start again. Then maybe you'll kind of click to what's going on. So the second half is the mercy now that he comes back. And this is where it's hard for us. If we had an adulterous spouse, for us to be able to show this type of mercy. And that's what is so important for you and I to learn from this. Not the fact of how this husband was able to reconcile with his wife, but how we, in our sin, are committing adultery against God. And how that God, in the judgments that he should bring upon us, and he may have to bring upon us, that he will remain loyal and faithful to us, even in our adulterous, sinful life. So he has to rebirth them, and so recreate and start anew in a way. And so that's what he starts to have. So 14 and 15, he says, behold, we read it. So we're not going to dig a lot in it, but listen to now the detail. Therefore, which means what? Everything I said before, because of that unfaithfulness. Behold, I will allure her. This is the transition. You notice he went from punishing and stripping her naked and calling her, a whore and a prostitute and an illegal woman and all this. And then he goes, I'm going to allure her. I'm not going to drag her, right? He's not saying, look at the difference. I will allure her and I'll bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. You notice it. So he starts out with, he's trying to reconcile. That's the part of the relationship. You start to go, okay, we really need to fix this relationship. You don't start out by being able to ridicule. You start anew. After the disappointment and the anger and all that happens, now it's time to start anew. And so the husband says, I will allure her. I will attract her. And then I will speak tenderly. But look where he brings her. To the wilderness, where she was born. And in a sense, was naked. Because they had nothing. So it's a reminder of where in which they've come from in that relationship. It's like, let's go back to the place where we first met. A couple will say, let's go back to the place we had that first date. And in that place was very special, wasn't it? Because that's when you had that little glimmer and you started looking at your spouse going, I think I love them. You have that little glimmer. So what's he doing? It sounds horrific. The desert? You guys met on your first date in the desert? But that's where the relationship was spawned. Now, the covenant's different. I'm talking about Israel as a nation state. So what does he do? I'm going to take her back to the place we first established this marriage. And that's a reminder to her as well, because when you bring her back there and she's out there with you, you start to remember, I remember that first date. I remember that and how we didn't have anything and how that we started with this. And that's when he says, I will give her her vineyards, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Achor, I don't know if you remember historically, this is where the Jew would sit there and go, I know what it is. The wilderness, I know what that is. So what did he just do? So where's Achor? Remember Achan, the sin of Achan? When the children of Israel came across the river Jordan and they were so victorious at Jericho, and then they fire up and they're going to go to Ai and take that city, and guess who coveted and took out some of the precious gold and then held it. And they had that big ordeal of going through and finding out who did it. And then there was a punishment, and they stoned them to death. And you know what they did? They piled rocks up on everything there in a monument, and it became known as the Valley of Achor. And when they fixed that sin, bam, they were victorious. It was a door. It was a fixing. So they were first victorious, and they stopped because of the sin of Ai and because of Achan. And when they corrected themselves and they fixed it and they made that monument, it became a reminder. And man, when they left Ai, they went to work and they started going. So this is the door. You see how he brought her over again? He took her back to the place and he met her in the wilderness. And he says, and you can see this almost sweeping across the Jordan once again, coming to this place of where they knew they had failed. But now he goes, this door's not opening up again as it did with Joshua and them. This is opening up for us. So he's starting to bring out this idea of a new covenant. A new covenant. This is where we start to get the shadowing of way down the line that he's going to address and deal with and bring in this. And there he said, she shall answer as in the days of her youth at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt. Are you starting to see the beauty of this story, this love story, of this commitment of the husband to this wife, and the husband being God and we being the wife, and how that God sometimes has to take us back to the beginning. Sometimes we have to be stripped naked in a sense spiritually to go back for him to be able to bring us back through and be prosperous once again. This is also a shadowing of the time they'll go off in captivity, that they're going to be captured, taken off, and stripped away, and then come back. And remember at the end of chapter 1, he talked about how Judah and Israel was going to come back and be united under one. And that was in reference to the way that when Judah would come back, that Zerubbabel would be the new king and they would rebuild the second temple. And so that is this great love story and showing there's hope and there's this consequences of the sin, and there's hope. And that's what he's saying. And so then in 16:17, and in that day declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, and no longer you call me my Baal. For I will remove the names of Baals from her mouth, and they shall be remembered by name no more. This is, I don't know if you know what the word Baal means in Hebrew? Lord. Lord. It can also have been used in reference, and you'll notice that you look at some biblical names. You look at some biblical names, they have the end of it, Baal. Baal. And so, and I always would look at that and I thought, that's terrible. Who would name their kid and put the name of Baal at the end of it? We know where that goes. Baals existed, but now understand. So this is where Hosea and God is bringing this beautiful picture out, because it is a Lord God idol, Baal. But it also means Lord. Now, who's the real Lord? Who's the real Baal? Well, God, Jehovah himself. But he doesn't say, when you look at this, he doesn't say, she will call me Lord, and she will not call me the Baal Lord. No, he uses something tender, doesn't he? She will call me husband. She will call me husband. And she will no longer. Now, remember, what was the problem when she went off and she saw all this, flax and wool and all that? What did she think? It's coming from Baal. And she is going to learn a lesson. Point in history, just to give you a reference, when the people of Israel come back, Judah comes back, you will find there's not another mention of the name of Baal or any idol worship again. Never. Isn't that crazy? I mean, if you look back through the history of when they come into the land, there was constant Baal in. Every 40 years, remember the judges? They would get righteous and kill off because of idol worship, and there's constantly this idol. No. When they come back, after the 70 years in Judah, when King Cyrus has them come back and rebuild, never again do they worship idols. This is exactly what Hosea is referencing. They will come back, and they will never use that name again. They will know without a doubt. They will not even remember their name at all. And so he's going to remove them from their mouth. They won't even recall it, and they will know for sure. This is the covenant that Jeremiah is going to speak about. He says, I will make a covenant on that day with the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens and the creepy things on the ground, and I will abolish the bow, the sword, war from the land, and I will make you lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice and steadfast love and mercy. There's a lot of things in here that are overlapping the prophets. The first and foremost is when we look at Ezekiel 34:25, he says, I will make with them a covenant of peace and banish wild beasts from the land so that they may dwell securely in the wilderness and sleep in the woods. This is not something that's a literal, physical. He wasn't going to purge out all the dangerous animals. But he's talking about a completely new relationship that is a spiritual relationship that would not have those. Jeremiah declares in 31:31, he says, behold, the days are coming. Now remember, these guys are prophesying around the same time. So the messages would make sense. They overlap. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And he says, not like the one I made with their fathers. So we know Jeremiah is saying there's a completely new covenant. Hebrew writer says in Hebrews 8:6, he says, but as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is much more excellent than the old covenant that he mediates now, since he enacted on better promises. So he's saying Christ now is mediating a covenant that's much better than the old one. This is what Hosea is pointing towards. This is what Ezekiel pointed towards. And then in Hebrews 9:15, the Hebrew writer says, therefore he is a mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called by may receive the promised eternal inheritance. So we see this fulfillment is what I'm trying to get you to see. If you grasp that much, this is the continuity of the message and the accuracy of all the prophets together. Same voice is coming from God to all these different messengers. But this is the beauty. He's showing it in a relationship that I am going to make we're going to renew our vows. And we're not going to build it on the old relationship that we had, because that could never work. The old law could never work. That's kind of what he's saying. The old law was imperfect. It's broke. It could not give you that forgiveness. I'm going to remarry you. I'm going to bring you out, and we're going to betroth, and I'm going to give you this love forever. And it will be this new relationship, a new renewing of our relationship, our vows, a new covenant. And that's what I found is wild and beautiful, so beautiful. And that's when he says the betrothment. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness. The whole problem was he did that once before and she wasn't. But he's willing to do it again. And you shall know the Lord. And then that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth, and the earth shall answer the grain and the wine and the oil, and they shall answer, listen to the word, Jezreel. And I will sow for her myself in the land, and I will have mercy on no mercy, and I will say to the people, not my people, you are my people. And I shall say to them, you are my God. You see the deconstruction of what sin did in breaking that relationship, and God labeled them no mercy, scattering, no, not my people, and turns around and shows it in this new covenant. It's going to be the opposite. When you had no mercy, you are now going to receive mercy. When you are not my people, you are now my people. When I scattered you, now that scattering is going to be a seed that will be productive and beautiful and prosperous. Whew, that's fast. We better stop there because I'm going to keep going because we got a lot more and it keeps going. I hope, please read chapter 3 because it continues to tie. And look at this like a beautiful story, the way that, we should be considering our relationship and how our Father feels so betrayed and crushed that it does hurt him in our sin and the betrayal, like a wife being unfaithful. But God is still faithful. So if we have sin in our lives, if you're here tonight and you have a sin that you're not dealing with, understand that it does grieve God. It does grieve him, and he wants to restore us as well. So I hope that you will think about these things, and if there's anything we can do in your relationship with him, let us know while we stand and sing.